Okay. The ex-ante-CEA's counterplan. The War Powers DA. Conditionality and the advantage. I have two cards like slated, but I don't know if I'll read them. If I do, I'll send them, obviously. Are we all good to go? Mm-hmm. Great. The counterplan is functionally identical to the plan and solves all of their impacts and as Congress pass implementation guarantees. They say the president can do whatever he wants in the areas of the treaties that the affirmative ratifies and then has the president enact all those things as congressional executive agreements. They have dropped the sufficiency framing from the 2NC that says that if they can't quantify an impact to a solvency deficit, there's no risk of the solvency deficit anyway. The first argument is that doesn't solve the NDT because it's not credible. Most of this explanation in the 1A is entirely new because the 2NC did not contextualize it to any of the advantages or make any arguments about signaling. Just read this terrible CRS card and moved on. They've conceded all the evidence of that evidence that it's from a random staffer, that it doesn't have any warrants in it. It actually just says that some people think that it's reversible and some people think it's not. The 1C evidence is explicit and it actually answers their signal argument. It talks about foreign states. It uses that phrase and says that that is sufficient because they perceive it as more reliable, more durable, and better and more efficacious. The goal of evidence says that it is literally interchangeable. The difference between ex-ante and ex-post CAs, the Bradley and Goldsmith evidence makes the distinction between what their evidence says is reversible and says that maybe it's reversible in terms of strict legalese, but outside the State Department, nobody knows the difference, which means that none of our allies or none of the other countries that are going into the arms control agreements would have any fucking idea what the difference between the plan and the counterplan is. All of their solvency deficits rely on this Frankenstein together of a bunch of terrible cards, like this reversibility card. The piece of reversibility evidence they read first is about the screwworm treaty that got withdrawn from like 40 years ago. No evidence says it's going to happen, and there's no evidence that says that Trump wants to withdraw from the treaty, which means that even if he potentially could, he wouldn't, so he wouldn't engender any of the instability that their evidence says. They say that perception is key. That argument was answered above. All of our evidence says that it's much better. The Hathaway evidence and the Harrington evidence are incredible and say that foreign countries care just as much about the counterplan. The hard legislation argument about reversibility. This card is about a reset of NSAs, which is not on the table between the plan and the counterplan. The counterplan is functionally the same thing as the plan because it provides the same hard legislation enacted by Congress. The Galbraith argument about them immediately doing stuff is irrelevant. The Harrington evidence says that the one that says that our method is more reliable because it causes foreign states to perceive that we're doing functionally the same thing in the areas of arms control. None of the evidence in the 1ACs that makes any distinction, and all of their solvency evidence just says we need to commit to binding NSAs. The counterplan is that binding NSA. They dropped our durable fiat argument that the counterplan durably fiats the president. Agree to the parameters that Congress sets out. They have no distinction between that and the affirmative because they also were fiating the president entering into a CEA, which means that if they get to do so without the president being able to withdraw in the future, then we do too. The counterplan is not linked to war powers. Our evidence is definitive and says that the counterplan merely lays out the areas in which the president can do whatever the fuck he wants, which is not a restriction on his authority. The plan is explicitly that, which is all the link arguments on the war power. The argument that the president is the final actor of the plan is a new argument striking from your flow. The 2NC was made the 2NC strategic choices were made based on what the 2NC messed up. Even if the president is the final actor, the final action of the president is getting restricted permutation to both links because it involves congressional action, which is the argument from the 2NC. The war powers dissad. I don't need to win a big dissad here. The tiniest sliver of the tiniest sliver is almost sufficient because the counterplan solves the entirety of the case. But here's a big dissad anyway. Bioweapons cause extinction. The past is not a good predictor. Capabilities are expanding at exponential rates. Pathogens can we weaponize to stay in the air and overcome burnout. They did not get to the nuclear war defense. Nathan prompted him, but the timer went off. They've dropped that nuclear winter does not fucking cause extinction. The Frankel evidence says that those studies have been empirically verified as bunk, which means that the only scenario for extinction is a pathogen that can spread throughout the globe. The U evidence, the card about you being wrong, okay, maybe you was wrong in the context of terrorism, but what's the evidence in the Donahue evidence says that specifically executive speed and secrecy are vital for the process of responding to biological threats. They have no answer to that argument, so even if you was wrong about broad counterterrorism in the context of our specific scenario, it can be true. We're not going to go over the U-turns case argument, but the group next to arguments about Congress checking global war, literally no justification for these arguments. The one on C dissent was the same. We did not read any new impacts. The U-targ was even tagged turns the case. Strike these from your flow. There's no justification of my tuner should not be able to answer new impact turns when they just said stories been fundamentally the same. We didn't read any new impact add-ons. Restrictions not coming now. The Gold Guy evidence says that those restrictions are not going to matter because they're superficial at best. The Serwer evidence says that the Democratic House is not going to do anything meaningful on Trump now. The Moran evidence says that the current vote indicates that the Democratic House doesn't want to wait in. The Soman evidence says that the Syria thumper says that Syria vote was merely symbolic and doesn't actually restrict his authority. The Cruz evidence says that that's also the case, and they've dropped the link distinction argument. The Scary evidence says that nuclear restrictions are uniquely emboldened Congress and caused the spillover effect that our Klukowski evidence cites. They've functionally conceded the link argument. They've dropped the argument that the plan emboldens broader authority fights, which is all the positive and trivial evidence that true friend and the one and all that spills over and causes an escalating fight between Congress and the president and emboldens Congress to take back their power. The argument that the Democratic House proves that there wouldn't be blatant capability is entirely wrong because argument is about the political will. It is latent now, but the plan inspires them to take on further restrictions. The thumpers, they dropped all the evidence from 2019 that says that those are not having now. Their evidence is from 2017. It's aspirational about what the Dems are going to do to check Trump, but those things didn't happen because all of our evidence is incredibly recent. Yes, there's an impact to bioweapons. The middle evidence says that an engineer can overcome the barriers that their evidence describes because they're not hard to do so, and non-state actors are increasingly acquiring the capability and motive by which to do that. The Rose evidence says it's never been easier to make an extinction-level bioweapon. Yes, disease impact. Their evidence doesn't assume messing with the diseases and making them genetically engineered to be more lethal. The necessary and proper counterplan. Two options without kicking planks is good. Framing issue. Punishment is bad, especially in the NDT finals. Going for conditionality would be a disgrace. Justifies punishing at the introduction of any bad argument. It makes T and RVI. Trivializes serious offenses. Do it on something minor like skewing time allocation. Two main pieces of offense. One is that it's most real world and logical. Policymakers have to fend off amendments and counter proposals from both sides and have real-time constraints like the docket and finite staffing resources. Proves that's a realistic skill. Breath comes before death. Stale debates are horrible and hard debates bolster critical thinking. Second is negative ground. The app controls the direction of the debate by selecting their case and strategically shifting. In the 2EC shifts, the block needs options to shift into response. Since ground is reactionary and concessionary, it's key to fairness, which is intrinsic good for debate. One plus the status quo does not solve their offense. You can still skew the 2EC by reading a complex counterplan by reading lots of dissents and key violations, which is a conceded argument. Generics don't solve flexibility. They're less education, lots of specific negative is all better, and they drop the reasonability argument. The case there's no impact to parole. If every country that developed nuclear weapons before means that it wouldn't escalate, they drop the call evidence that says the time frame is 17 years. You can only die once, which means that dissent comes first, and they drop that realism drives international relations. States only act in their own self-interest and will not adopt arms control measures, which means they will not model the signal of the plan.